Welcome. Welcome. Well, come in. Kindly step all the way in, please.
We hope that this voyage you're about to take, 20,000 leagues under the sea, will stimulate your interest in the phenomenon of life in the ocean depths.
Mother, I was reading about a fellow named Tom Edison, who's working on an idea for snap-on electric lights.
I'll believe that when I see it.
That's my wife, Sarah.
Eastern Airlines Flight 25, your vacation flight to cool Caribbean lagoons, now ready for boarding.
WDW Radio, your information station.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to WDW Radio, your home and guide for all things Disney parks and experiences around the world. I am Lou Mangello, and this is show number 819. And for nearly 20 years, we've been sharing our love for Disney together through the podcast, live video every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, blog, group events, and so much more. And whether you've been here since the beginning or this is your first time tuning in, welcome home. And remember, you are part of this amazing Disney family and community. Everything you need is over at www.radio.com. So let's dive right in, because I want you to imagine starting off as a Jungle Cruise skipper in Walt Disney World and ending up helping to shape some of Disney's most legendary attractions. Join me this week as I sit down with former Disney Imagineer and master storyteller Jason Surrell, whose creative work spans things like Pirates of the Caribbean, Haunted Mansion, Star Tours, New Fantasyland, and much, much more. Jason shares his origin stories, behind-the-scenes insights, and the future of immersive Disney storytelling, plus lessons from Marty Sklar, Tony Baxter, and other Disney legends. So if you love Disney history, Imagineering secrets, and hidden details, this episode on Designing Disney is hopefully the first in a series you won't want to miss. Then stay tuned for our Disney Trivia Question of the Week for your chance to win a Disney Prize package, and more updates at the end of the show. Please connect with me on social. I am at Lou Mangello, and visit LouMangello.com whether you're looking for a speaker for your event, or if you are a creator or solopreneur looking to take your ideas, business, or brand to the next level. I want to help you transform what you love into what you do. And if you like what you hear, and I hope that you do, please share the show and tell a friend. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of the WDW Radio Show.
Serpents and spiders, tail of a rat, call in the spirits wherever they're at. Rap on a table, it's time to respond. Send us a message from somewhere beyond.
"20 years ago, when I was just a little baby podcaster, I had the pleasure and privilege of meeting and interviewing a Disney Imagineer whose work I had unknowingly admired for years. That man was Jason Surrell, and that podcast was not this one, but the one that got me started, which was Mouse Tunes. Well, 2 decades later, we have come full circle. Reunited, and it feels so good. I am so excited to welcome for the first time to the show, a man whose work at Disney has left indelible marks on countless attractions, including but not limited to the reimagined Star Tours, New Fantasyland, Pirates of the Caribbean, Legend of Captain Jack Sparrow, Monsters, Inc. Laugh Floor, Symphony of the Stars, American Idol, Star Wars Weekends, Great Movie Ride, Stitch's Supersonic Celebration. We'll come back to you a little bit later.
Much later.
And so much more. I want to welcome back to the show Jason Surrell.
I really don't want Stitch to be on the tombstone, do you?
Oh, yeah, we're not going to talk as much about it. We'll save that for a separate show.
Of all of the wagons to hitch my star to.
It is good to see you again.
No, it's great to be back. I can't believe it's been 20 years.
It has been 20 years. I think it was like 2000, like late 2005.
Yep.
When
I remember that interview, actually.
Do you really?
Yeah, I remember it.
It was that bad. You're scarred. Your therapist.
No, it was like more of that guy.
Yeah.
I do well with Northeastern Italians, as it turns out.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, and I'm sure people who have discovered WWE since then probably have. I have a feeling, Jason, that they've heard of you for a variety of different reasons, all of which are good. Whether it's reading your books, seeing you on stage at D23 events, experiencing some of the things that you've done here, especially in Walt Disney World, and we're going to get to as much of that as we can. But I think that every great storyteller, which is what you are, and every superhero has an origin story. I am a sucker for it. What's yours? What first drew you to themed entertainment, and how did you find your way to Imagineering?
My origin story began, as all good ones do, in the city of Cleveland. Or the Versailles of the Midwest, as we like to call it. Or Metropolis. It's Metropolis now. So I share an origin story with Superman.
Nice.
Let that sink in for a minute. No, as a kid, though, like a lot of us, I grew up a Disney kid, watching the Sunday night show, going to all of the movies. And the cool thing about growing up in the 70s, and there are only 2 or 3 cool things about growing up in the 70s.
Disco, hello.
Hello. But the great thing as it relates to Disney is you got all of the classic shows on TV, whether it was first run on Sunday night with Wonderful World of Disney or Mickey Mouse Club. A lot of the old programming we got to see in syndication in the 70s. So you didn't have to grow up in the 50s and 60s to experience a lot of that classic content, film and television. And then obviously with Disney, in addition to the new releases, which were fewer and farther between in the 70s, again, we got all of the reissues. So I got to see The Love Bug and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Blackbeard's Ghost and all of the animated films in theaters. And then our first trip down here to Walt Disney World was in 1975. I was 5, so now everyone can do some very basic math. And I fell in love with that from the beginning. And like everything else Disney, what I've come to realize is what the parks gave me and give everyone, and this is something now that I do for a living, we provide comfort, reassurance, and escape. And obviously, with the world being in the shape that it's been in, for 5 or 6 years now, going back to the pandemic, all of what we're experiencing now just reinforces the notion that that's what people seek out. And as a kid, I sought it out in movie theaters, in the pages of books, in TV shows, and of course, the parks. And that sort of instilled what I call the Imagineering dream in me from a young age. I just never thought I could do it because I wasn't an artist, architect, or engineer. I had a very limited view of what Imagineering was, or what I thought it was. And it was only much later in life that I realized that as a writer and storyteller, I had every bit as much to contribute to the art of Imagineering, the art of the theme show, as any of those other disciplines. So jumping around a little bit, but that first trip led to almost annual trips down to Walt Disney World from Cleveland, and then later in my childhood added Disneyland into the mix, and it just reinforced the notion that this is what I want to do. I always knew I wanted to be in entertainment somewhere. And to some extent, I've had parallel dreams, like the film and television dream, and I've made an independent film. I've written a little for television, so I got to scratch that itch. But it was the Imagineering dream that really took off from a fairly young age, because I started pitching shows when I was 20 and an hourly performer in the parks. And
what was your first role? Right? Were you a skipper?
I was a Jungle Cruise skipper, so
it's funny. I can't see that. I really don't see that.
Exactly. I'm very reserved,
right.
And I don't like to offend anybody. So yeah, that was an adjustment. No, it's a great first Disney job to have, and it's a great first themed entertainment job to have, and I still love that. I love that I started as a skipper, and then the next summer I auditioned for entertainment, and I got cast at Epcot in a role that we'll remain undisclosed, as children may be listening. And that was really where I found my people, as they say today. I don't think I had the greatest.
Were you the walk around Ken Jennings studio?
I was, exactly. And I had to maintain the look, lest I be disapproved. No, it was funny because I was a little bit introverted as a kid. And then it was really in high school, when I got cast in show choir in my high school, that it sort of brought out that side of me. And once that genie was out of the bottle, it never went back in, to the eternal dismay of my parents, 2 wives, and at least several dozen friends, and some acquaintances. No, but it was so I found my people that summer. I transferred down here to the University of Central Florida from my school in Ohio. And the reason I bring that up is because literally within a month of moving down here, 20 years old, in college, one of my fellow performers came to me and said, "Hey, I have an idea for a Christmas show for the characters here at Epcot. Would you want to work on it with me? You seem like a pretty good writer." And I remember being a little taken aback by that. I'm like, writer? What writer? I had written for the departmental newsletter, and then sort of on my own, I would do these David Letterman style top 10 lists that I would post in the rehearsal room every morning. And everyone would gather around like, oh, what's that crazy idiot said today? But that apparently led people to believe that I could write. So he said, "Would you want to work on this with me?" And being a 20-year-old idiot, not knowing that hourly performers don't pitch shows, I'm like, sure, let's do it. It was like Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney. Now we can take 20 minutes and explain who those two are. So anyway, the upshot of all that is by the age of 21, I was literally standing on the shores of World Showcase Lagoon, listening to Mickey, Minnie, and Goofy say things that I thought of. And it was that was kind of the aha moment for me, because I had been in business school, because I was sort of bewitched by Michael Eisner and Frank Wells when they took over Disney in '84. And that made me feel like, well, I still want to be in entertainment, but look at what these guys are doing. I want to run something. Well, it was that first show at Epcot that kind of course corrected that and made me realize, no, moron, you're a creative.
But I have to imagine, 21, despite what if you are 21 is so young.
Yeah.
To be so did you sort of recognize at the time, was it like, what am I doing here? Or how did I get here? I can't imagine, almost like wonderfully overwhelming that had to have been.
Yeah, and it's funny because
that's all you. Like, it's your responsibility. You wrote it, you pitched it, wrote it, and directed it,
It's funny because I don't know that Guinness keeps track of this, but I believe I was the youngest person to ever sell a show at Disney and actually have it get produced, 20 years old. And it was a lot of what you described. There was that sort of bewilderment of, how did this even happen? I was just on the college program. And because of the way that show originated, it did sort of just come out of nowhere. 2 guys thinking, oh, well, we have ideas. But the reason I bring it up and put it that way is because, having grown up on the Bob Thomas biography of Walt and all sorts of other books on Disney, in my mind, on some level, what had happened to me was how it should work. Because I had spent years reading all of these stories about Walt plucking people from one area and dropping them into another and saying, oh, you're doing this now, like Exitensio. You're going to go to WED and you're going to write the pirate show. And X is like, what? Where'd this come from? So
but Walt knew and convinced him very quickly, you're not a this or that. You are a storyteller, and it's just a different medium that you're going to use to tell stories.
Yes, and the funny thing is, even though the Disney at the time wasn't really like that anymore, somehow Bob Crummett, who was the other performer, and I found a way to make that happen, just out of optimism and passion and enthusiasm. So, but the funny thing is, it shouldn't have happened. And yet, because of my history with Disney and Disney's own history, it also seemed perfectly natural to me.
Even though it was such an accelerated, journey for you, because, you start off as, you're a performer. Look, especially in the Jungle, you were a performer, right? You're a cast member. I think every cast member who's on stage is a performer. I think even more so there. You go from performer to writing to Imagineering. How does that journey influence your approach to storytelling in the parks?
It's funny because I think that question triggers in me just the idea that you literally go from being boots on the ground delivery agent for all of these stories, because that's ultimately what the frontline cast members are. They're frontline storytellers. But you phrasing that way, it made me rethink it, like, oh wow, that really is what happened. And not only was there a progression from frontline to behind the scenes, but also this gradual intensification of the experience, like going from Jungle Cruise to my performing role, which we can be vague about, but that kicked things up a notch in terms of characterizations and having to communicate using only your body in some ways, and it just
everybody listening is going, who do I imagine?
Talking? Right, exactly. Well, he doesn't speak, and he's a really, really good boy. But yeah, and then the fact that the first writing and creative experience literally grew out of that performing experience, it creates a continuum, I think, to my professional and creative life that is kind of astounding to me now, just in terms of how it was able to happen at all. Because these aren't easy jobs to get. And if you're talking about Imagineering, you're literally talking about a dream come true, lightning strike lottery situation.
Sure. And so how does that happen? How do you go from standing on the shores of World Showcase Lagoon to that dream job you never knew that you were dreaming of having?
It's interesting because a couple of other things happened around that same time that fed directly into it. I had been good friends with Dave Smith, the renowned Disney archivist, founder and ruler of the archives for decades. I had met him during high school when my family lived in California, and I wrote the studio an actual letter. We can explain what that is for all the kids.
Jason's like pretending to have a pen up in the air.
Right. This will be the first episode you have to footnote, Lou, and I'm proud of that. It's like Dennis Miller. Like, how do we keep track of all of these arcane references? Like lined notebook paper. So I completely derailed there. What was I?
Dave Smith.
Oh yeah, Dave Smith. So I told him I was.
You took out your papyrus. And
right, exactly. The abacus was clicking along. No, I wrote to him and said, I'm writing a paper about Walt Disney because I had read somewhere, I think in the Disney Channel magazine, that the archives was open to legitimate journalists and students and this sort of thing. So I told him I was doing a paper, which I was not. So he invited me in, and my mom took me. I was 15 years old, summer of '85. And what was wonderful about that was he actually took me around the back lot as it was being systematically dismantled for new offices and parking structures, because the Eisner Wells revolution just transformed not only the whole company, but the studio lot. But as a 15-year-old, I got to walk down the streets of Quake City. Dave pointed off to the side and he goes, see that old building? And it was just this ramshackle one-story shack. And I go, yeah. He goes, that's the garage where Fred McMurray invented flubber. And there's the church from Pete's Dragon. And they flooded this whole area, and that was Passamaquoddy. Just, and for me, it was like going to Oz.
Yeah.
So that experience created the relationship with Dave. And the whole point I was trying to get to 45 years later is in the 20th anniversary press event in the fall of '91 here at Walt Disney World. Dave was a guest, and he got me a credential. So I got to, I was still an hourly performer, but I put on a shirt and a tie and put the lanyard on and just walked around to all of these events and presentations. And I met Marty Sklar in the forecourt of Muppets 3D right by the fountain. And I go up to him and I go, oh, Mr. Sklar, my name's Jason. I'm actually in entertainment here, but I'm a writer. I want to be an Imagineer. And he looks at me and he goes, well, I'll tell you what you do. And he points in my face. He goes, you call a man here named Mike West. You tell him Marty sent you, and he'll talk to you and help you figure it out.
Wow.
So I go to the company directory, and I find a Mike West who was right there at Disney MGM Studios, which is where I was at the time. I went over to the studio, and I went in to see him. And literally his first words to me were, the only reason you're sitting in that chair is because Marty called me and said I had to talk to you. And I said, oh, well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. I feel welcome.
You must have made one heck of a very quick impression on Mr. Sklar as you walked up to him in front of that
So I started talking to Mike, and it was very much an informational interview. And Mike is still a dear friend because he turned out to be my discoverer and mentor. The reason I bring that up is because a couple months after that, I had transferred from Epcot to the studios and started doing the same thing. What if we did this? What if we did that? And two of the ideas happened to involve the Backlot Tram Tour. I wanted to create these live entertainment experiences that would unfold along the tour route. One was based on Encino Man, which, again, for the kids listening, was a Touchstone movie where Pauly Shore and Sean Astin discover a caveman played by Brendan Fraser. It's just a awful teen comedy, but it popularized the song "I'm Too Sexy." So I said, what if we had that song play and all of these cave girls came out of one of the houses on Residential Street? We have the Pauly Shore character, the Sean Astin character, and a caveman come out. So they're like, well, we love it, but it involves the tram tour, so you're going to have to go talk to Imagineering. So again, if you have to think, I'm 22 by now. These people just said I have to go talk to Imagineering, so my head exploded. So I go to Imagineering, and who is sitting behind the desk? Mike West. And he looks up and he goes, oh, it's you again. like you're a bad penny. And so I pitched him the idea, and he said, okay, well, his response is something that has literally guided my philosophical thinking about what we do to this day. He said, what you have is a cute moment. You have a cute little musical moment. The characters are visually interesting. It's based on a movie that's going to be out, so it's great. But you don't have a story. Here at Disney, we tell stories. Everything has a beginning, middle, and an end. And literally within the next 5 minutes, he started spitballing and brainstorming and literally built a 3-act story out of this little musical moment that I had. And that taught me, in effect, how to do it. Because that's the kind of thinking you apply to whatever it is, whether it's a little tram tour moment or Epic Universe. It's the same principle. Did the same thing a couple months later with Sister Act. I thought, well, we have a church on the tram tour. What if we had nuns come out? And meanwhile, as a recovering Catholic, I was probably signing my own warrant. But again, worked with Mike on that. And then through the course of working with him, he gave me a sample assignment. He basically said, and I'm just going to continue throwing out timely references. He said, we have a naked audio animatronics figure, which I think it was the Joe Cocker figure from California, infamous. And he goes, and we've got the boots from Super Mario Brothers, which was the 1993 live action version with Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo. Because when you think of Mario and Luigi, that's who you think of. So he said, well, we've got the boots. We want to put him on the figure and have him hovering outside the walking tour. So I came up with a whole backstory for who this robot was, how it had gained sentience and escaped from a lab, and created a personality that was very stream of consciousness in Robin Williams. And I wrote little routines for him to perform as kind of a barker, kind of like we used to have the Barker bird out in front of the Tiki Room and Pirates. So I was all excited about this opportunity. And then when Mike finally called me in to review it, he said, well, there's some interesting ideas in here, but I think you just need to go out and get some more experience, which to me was the worst thing I could have heard, because I thought, oh my gosh, I've somehow managed to nudge this door open and I feel like it just slammed shut because I'm not ready. Well, as fate would have it, a fellow performer said a couple days later, I was lamenting, what I saw as a botched opportunity. And he said, well, I happen to know the lady who produces Halloween Horror Nights. I'll introduce you. So that was how I met Julie Zimmerman, who was the co-creator of Halloween Horror Nights. And because of all of that extracurricular work that I had done since the Epcot show, if you looked at my resume, I still haven't graduated from college yet, but it kind of looks like I know what I'm doing. So she called me in, and because Universal was so lean and mean and young at the time, they could take a chance on somebody like me. So she gave me some writing assignments, and that year I started getting paid to create with a lot of the live shows at Halloween Horror Nights in 1984, including Bill and Ted's Excellent Halloween Adventure, which would go on to be kind of a calling card for me. Yeah. But that's how I got launched professionally in terms of getting paid for it. And then through the course of working at Universal for 5 years, where I wrote, produced, directed any and every kind of piece of live entertainment there is, I segued over to the attraction side because one of the people that I'd been working with, Ross Osterman, who was working for what was then, it's called Universal Creative today. Back then it had the much more exotic, sexy name of Planning and Development. So I'm working with Ross on developing the live entertainment program for Islands of Adventure. And he said, well, why don't you come do this for us? And I'm like, what? So through Ross, I became the show writer for Jurassic Park, The Land at Islands of Adventure, wrote the script for the River Adventure. Now, all of a sudden, I have an e-ticket credit on my resume, just as a job is opening up at Imagineering. So I applied for it. It was a show writer position. I go in for the interview. I go to a very familiar looking building on the Disney MGM studio lot. Who's sitting behind the desk? Mike West. And he looks up and he goes, you again. And then he looks down at my resume and he goes, well, I'll be damned. 5 years ago, I told you to go out and get more experience, and that's exactly what you did. Well, what do you want to do now? And I said, I want to come home. And he goes, okay. And that was what led to the next 15 years at Imagineering. But
I mean, it's a great, I love that story, Jason. And I think there's just great takeaways that an inspiration you can take from that for somebody who's listening to.
Well, the takeaway for me then and now, and this is something that I share with everyone, particularly young people, is you do have to make your own magic. And that can sound like a corny Disney tenet, but it's not. It is reality. The reality is no one is waiting for you to come into their office and blow them away with your great new idea. Nobody cares. You've got to put yourself out there, make your own magic, and find the opportunities. And sometimes you'll find them on purpose, and other times you'll sort of stumble through them blindly. But in my experience, those experiences cobbled together are ultimately what gave me a career. And I say to this day, without Mike West, Julie Zimmerman, and Ross Osterman in that order, I have no career, which is one of the reasons that today, as sort of an elder statesman of the industry, which is another way of saying old, you can say it. You're sitting here giggling politely, but you can say it. It is incredibly important to me to take time for young people and to cultivate, not only in the sort of it's the right thing to do because people did it with you, but also because if you genuinely have passion for this industry and have spent decades cultivating your own philosophies in terms of how this work should be done, it is incumbent upon you to try to pass that along. And themed entertainment has a very rich history of institutional knowledge and sort of the oral tradition in terms of how these things are passed down. That's actually one of the things that motivated me to write the books years ago, was the fact that so much of this, other than the wonderful Imagineering coffee table book from 1996, none of this really had been written down. You could get pieces of it from Walt biographies and things like that. But it is very important to me to sort of quantify all of this stuff and package it in a way that's accessible to people and makes sense so that we can continue this work.
Well, I think there's a couple of things in there too. I think one, your journey sort of jumping back and forth is not unique. The theme park industry is relatively small.
Yep.
Like there's a lot of sort of back and forth and sharing and collaborating and getting experience one to the other. And I think too, you evidence something that I talk about and I teach all the time, is that we're all in the relationship business.
Yes.
You might be the smartest, best storyteller, but if you don't have those relationships with those people, those opportunities, and the benefit that we get from it never ends up happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And human relationships are like the most important resource that you can cultivate. I remember I would always get blasted when I was directing Bill and Ted. They'd be like, oh, you just cast his friends. And I'm like, no, I cast people I know who are the best person for that role.
And trust, right?
Exactly.
Trust, right.
But you're getting the best of both worlds. The relationship is what gives you the knowledge and the comfort level that they can do it. But to your point, the trust. Yeah. I saw firsthand, moving in both directions, what relationships are able to do for you. And I mean it in the sort of pure organic way, not the smarmy networking way where, because you can always tell if someone's like hustling you.
Right. Or in it just for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And one of the things that I came to realize later in life was if I sit down with a young person for coffee or an informational interview or whatever, I can generally tell within a minute if they have what it takes to go the distance, at least in terms of their grasp of the big picture and what this work wants to be. You can tell right away, and you can smell phonies right away.
Yeah. And I think what I'm about to say is applicable to that. I was thinking of this in terms of, as you were talking about this journey and the ideation process, it made me think to, the Eisnerism of everything speaks, right? Everything tells a story, and how you approach attractions and shows and things that you're working on, where every single detail has to contribute to the experience, just like every single detail from what that interaction you might have had with that kid walking in to try and talk to you sort of impacts the overall experience between the two of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to that point, everything does contribute. Everything does tell a story. And in a way, it's similar to film, where you don't want to include any scene that doesn't advance the narrative, and you see that a lot in special effects films where it's eye candy. It looks great, but there's nothing really happening. The same thing is true of a theme park attraction where, and another commonality is just the sheer expense. The point being, these are such expensive endeavors. You can't afford to waste any of your precious resources on elements that don't advance the story or somehow contribute to the guest experience. And in the case of Disney, one of the things you hear about Disney again and again and again is the attention to detail. And that, I think, is why you get something like a Pirates of the Caribbean or the Haunted Mansion, where for decades they captivate people because they're so rich in detail. I mean, there are times now I'll ride the Mansion or Pirates and see or hear something I never noticed before, and it gives me the biggest thrill, because it's like, oh my gosh, here I thought I knew this experience, and yet I'm always uncovering something new. And that, I think, is just a testament to the importance of detail and how everything is very carefully, lovingly curated in terms of crafting an experience for people. And that doesn't apply just to theme parks. That's life.
I remember when the Mansion changes and updates happened, I'd ride through so proud, I know the guy who worked on this. I would just throw your name around to anybody who would listen. But you worked on so many attractions in the Disney parks, and maybe you can come back and talk about some of those at a later time. May or maybe not talking about Stitch's Supersonic Celebration in particular.
You know what? For our two fans, that would be a hell of a way to spend an hour, wouldn't it?
But you work on two of the most legendary attractions in Disney history, right? Haunted Mansion and Pirates. What is, and I have to assume that there are many, but what was sort of the biggest challenge in balancing preserving their legacy while evolving them for new, sometimes younger audiences too?
It's interesting, because one of the things that kind of amuses me about some hardcore fans, because as you may have realized, the internet is filled with people who are quite vocal.
No, stop it. Where?
And they're immediate in terms of the feedback.
I always say, you want to make Disney fans crazy, just tell them you're changing something.
Yeah, exactly. But here's where I've always found that odd. The rallying cry is, Walt never would have done this. Walt would hate this. When the reality is, Walt was the first person to change something, rip it out if it wasn't working, constantly plussing. In fact, one of his most famous quotes was about how Disneyland was a living thing that can grow and change over time and will never be completed. So that's my response to the notion of change. Now, having said that, if you're dealing with something that doesn't work or has somehow fallen out of favor, that's one thing. It's still going to have its fans, but that's pretty obvious in terms of why you would change it, remove it, whatever. The opposite of that is, we're going to go in and mess around with the Haunted Mansion and Pirates of the Caribbean, literally the crown jewels of the Disney kingdom, no pun intended. So what I learned on the Pirates of the Caribbean redo in 2006, the perfect quote was from the show producer, Kathy Rogers, who's absolutely wonderful producer, one of my favorite people I've ever worked with, and she's featured in the Women of Imagineering book. I can't say enough good things about Kathy. She summed up the approach to that whole effort, which was, we're not changing anything, we're adding. We're adding little touches to tie the attraction to the films, and obviously Pirates is a weird example because you have an attraction that inspired a blockbuster film trilogy that then informed the attraction that inspired it. But that notion of adding, not changing. Now, certain things were changed, like the ship's captain was replaced with Barbossa. Get it. But for the most part, if you think of that enhancement, it was all additions to what was already there. And I think that project is really emblematic of the way to do it right, where you're honoring what's there, but you're not being slavish to what's there. And then, of course, over time, you saw, even prior to Jack Sparrow, they changed the infamous chase scene, to make it a little bit more PC. And then more recently and more controversially, the change of the auction scene. And again, that's something that goes back to Walt's time. There are well-known stories of Walt seeing the mock-up of the auction scene and kind of looking at the Imagineers going, well, this is okay, right, guys? So I think it was a little on the bubble from day one. But the enhancement to bring the film into the ride in particular was an example of nailing it. And then with Haunted Mansion, we upgraded the bride figure to have the projection feature and tell a little bit more of a story, and along with the story of her husband's in the attic, which again has been altered yet again. And then in the case of the 2007 enhancement here, we had a chance to add a whole new scene, and it was very important to us to add something that felt like it had been there from the beginning. We considered any and everything you can think of. It was actually Tom Fitzgerald, legendary creative executive at Imagineering, who mandated that our solution be architectural. And what he meant by that was he didn't want a media show or something that might somehow take away from the quality of the rest of the mansion, which is a dimensional, immersive experience.
Or using technology for technology's
sake. Yeah. And again, that brings us back to the example of a movie that is style over substance, empty calories. Tom wanted to do something that felt architectural and organic, like it was already there, and that's what led ultimately to the Endless Staircase. And the funny thing is, with the projected footprint effect, that's straight out of a Ken Anderson sketch from the 50s, when it was still the haunted house. So again, you see an example where there are mostly additions as opposed to changes or subtractions. Right. That's when people tend to get the most upset.
You had the tombstone, right? The Leota tombstone,
yes,
right? Yeah.
And it was funny because when I thought of that earlier when you were asking about my Epcot experience with that first show, like that had to have been surreal to some extent. I have never had that feeling more strongly than with the Leota tombstone because of what the attraction represented. I was writing the book at the time, but to this day, and I've worked on some big stuff, to this day, one of the things I am most proud of is that epitaph, because I know that it sits in that garden alongside Exitensio's epitaphs. That means the world to me.
And it's going to be there forever. Like your kids, your grandkids will be able to go and be like, my hand. And I know it's a collaborative effort.
Yeah,
but,
no, absolutely.
My fingerprints are all over that.
And that's what you want that's what you want to get out of the industry and the art in general. I'm reminded, and I'm going to screw this up, so I hope there are no Walt Whitman fans out there, but I'm reminded of the Walt Whitman verse that Robin Williams quotes in Dead Poets Society. Just allow me to contribute a verse. The play goes on. It's probably not even Walt Whitman, and I'm going to get eaten alive. You know what? I'm not really a writer. I'm going to go learn how to hang drywall. It's a whole new day for me. No, but the notion of the Disney parks being this ongoing play or pageant, and you get to contribute a verse, that in and of itself is enough. Especially for a kid growing up in the Midwest, watching the shows, going to the movies, coming to the theme parks. Just the idea that I've contributed a verse at all is mind-blowing to me. But it really rings true with things like the tombstone because those are so personal to me.
When we were talking about Mansion Pirates, it made me think of conversations that I had on the show recently, and just I think conversations that happen year over year. They are so classic. They are so beloved. They are so, generationally timeless. I will ask you, are there any attractions that are untouchable? And I'm going to leave it intentionally vague.
It's interesting because the way I would have answered that question is, well, certainly Pirates and Mansion. So I think that proves that nothing is untouchable, but you had better be artful and careful about whatever it is you're doing to alter it or enhance it. And that again takes me back to the Kathy Rogers quote of adding and not changing. And that's not to say that you can't screw something up by adding, but that was the exact right approach for that particular project. And I think it holds true for a lot of things. It's interesting because you see a lot of, I guess you could call it creative experimentation with small world. You know, the latest example being, the Marvel characters added. That seems like a little out of left field, and yet the response seems to be great. People love it. And
well, you get the Walt wouldn't have wanted it that way, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe Walt would have, in Walt's time.
Well, here's an even bolder question. If Walt had stayed alive, because he died young, if Walt had lived into the 1980s, would he have changed It's a Small World? Would he have gotten rid of it? I think the answer is selectively, or depending on what we're talking about, potentially yes.
He might have brought the Encino Man characters in.
Exactly. I like to think, in fact, it was a vision I had in the shower. I saw Walt appear out of the steam and he said, now what I'd like to do is bring that caveman character to life.
Brendan Fraser in 2025 is going to be a big deal again. So.
Epcot will be home to a talking raccoon.
Well, I think, the untouchable, and it's, as you were talking about, the having to add, I think to a certain degree, is that sort of the conundrum with Carousel of Progress?
Yes, absolutely.
How do you touch it without upsetting 50 to 90% of the audience?
I think, unfortunately, the answer is some things are just going to come to the end of their lifespan. I had just started at Imagineering when they said we're closing Horizons, to put in Mission Space. And because I was still more of a fan than an Imagineer, because I was brand new, I had more of a fan reaction, like, you can't do that. But then when you get into it and you realize you have this massive building that can do X thousands of people an hour a day, and 11, I'm making this up, but 11 people are going through in an hour, like, you can't have that. And I think Epcot in general is a great example of a park that has undergone a metamorphosis or two over the years, because the original model that it was sort of founded upon, the World's Fair model, just isn't something that's out there in the world anymore. So to that point, I don't think you're ever going to see a giant building with a solitary attraction in it at Epcot, these giant World's Fair style experiences, because the world has moved on. It doesn't mean that Epcot is not still a wonderful place or an ingenious place when it first opened, but there's a reason these things are living organisms, and Walt knew that. And I think that's the perfect example right there. If Walt had not died, what would Epcot have become? Would he have realized there were too many challenges with literally trying to operate a city with property owners and taxpayers? Would we have ended up with Walt Disney's Epcot Center? Maybe. You can't second guess, because you couldn't really second guess Walt in his lifetime. So how are you supposed to do it after he's gone?
So they give you a 100 match, and they give you Pirates, wildly successful. Some random house said, hey, let's really push Jason as far as we can. Now we want you to go in and completely update Fantasyland, right? Again, something that is so deeply rooted in nostalgia. Again, you're given this challenge of how do you keep it fresh while staying true to the essence of what Fantasyland is?
Well, it's interesting because New Fantasyland originally came about here in Florida, in the Florida office. The Florida staff had been given some funding and a charter to, I believe it was come up with an e-ticket for the Magic Kingdom. And we were split up into groups, and the group I was in had originally started looking at a villains attraction that was media-based, almost like...
Nobody's into villains.
Nobody just cares about the villains. Their time has passed, let's be honest. Only a foolish person would have invest heavily in the Disney villains. So we were developing kind of a Soren style experience, but centered around the villains. And then finally, I came in one morning and I said, "Well, what if we took this theoretical hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and instead of doing one big experience, what if we sort of reinvented the way our company approaches Fantasyland?" And I was very much inspired by Tony Baxter and the team that transformed Fantasyland at Disneyland, where you went from those fairly cost-effective medieval tournament tents to fully lovingly realized versions of Toad Hall and Big Ben, and a remote European castle and a Bavarian puppet theater. What if we did the same thing for Florida and focus more heavily on the worlds that these stories take place in? And I was also inspired by I can't really call it a roadside attraction, but when I was a kid, we would go to this place in Pennsylvania called the Enchanted Forest, which is all of these little fairy tale environments within an outdoor setting. I thought, what if we, instead of focusing on a bricks and mortar attraction, approach this as more environmental and transform Fantasyland that way? So I wrote up an initial treatment that even though I did not stay with the project, in fact, the project was ultimately came out of Glendale, but what originated in Florida was that environmental approach. In my original treatment, I talk about happening upon Snow White's cottage, and that's where you meet her, where you expect to meet her. That's where the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train came from. The notion of I had written up a new approach to character meet and greets that was more experiential. The example I used that I had in my treatment was you actually went to Briar Rose Cottage. So you're making your way through a beautiful, fully rendered Ivan Earle style forest. There's the cottage. You make your way through it, and you through special effects and little interactive elements, you would see the fairies cleaning and kind of working in the cottage, and then you would meet Aurora out back in her Briar Rose costume with live animals. Wow. So the big idea there is, can we take a love and shove character experience where it's just point, click, autograph, buy kid, and turn it into experience? And I think that's what ultimately paved the way for Enchanted Tales with Belle. But that was really where it originated. And I still remember one of our local artists, Dave Buckley, did an aerial fun map style view of the new Fantasyland that if you set it side by side to the concept art that was released, ultimately you can see this little pocket in which all of these wonderful environments came to life, whether it's Snow White and the mountainous terrain of the mine train, or obviously Beast Castle and the village, and obviously the Little Mermaid area. All of that originated in this concept of let's take people into those worlds as opposed to front dooring them with another tournament tent.
And again, sometimes those low-tech, interactive, personalized experiences are even more impactful than something that is a higher tech, like, wow attraction.
Yeah, absolutely. But that example in my career has always blown my mind because the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, which I do not lay claim to by any means, but it originated as this paragraph in a treatment that described, a Snow White roller coaster. So, you talk about how the ways in which your work manifests over the decades, whether it's the Leota tombstone or whatever it happens to be, something as big as Epic Universe. But for me, it's like I still get a kick of walking through Fantasyland and seeing the mine train and go, all right.
Yeah, I helped,
Yeah.
Again, I helped sort of, we were talking before we started recording about Tokyo Disneyland, Tokyo Disney Sea, some of the overseas parks, which you admittedly have not had a chance to. We have to rectify that, Jason. We need to go. But I always describe Tokyo Disney Sea as this is what happens when you give Imagineering unlimited budget and unlimited creative freedom. I'm going to give you that gift. You now have complete creative freedom to reimagine any Disney attraction, past or present. What would it be and why?
It's interesting because, and it maybe it's a predictable answer given my history, but I have, Mystic Manor aside, I have literally fantasized about being given the opportunity to do the next incarnation of the Haunted Mansion. And what I would want to do with it is basically scale it up even more. Not that there's anything wrong with the attractions we have, but more. So, and what I mean by that is that was
like a Shanghai Pirates type.
What Shanghai is to pirates. What's the mansion version of that? And then taking it a step further, what is the Shanghai version of pirates that doesn't necessarily reflect the film trilogy? Like, what if we went back to the original Disney source material and did that kind of version of Pirates of the Caribbean? What would that look like? But with Mansion, it would be about employing the latest and greatest illusions and combining them with the old school theatrical tricks like Pepper's Ghost, because you wouldn't want to discard any of that. But the notion of doing kind of the ultimate thesis statement on what the Haunted Mansion is, that would be my dream project. And I have a couple of Star Wars things I don't want to talk about that I would love to. Right? No, because I mean, that I might still actually hold out hope for. But just a couple of ideas for Star Wars that had been considered in the early days that I still think very much have legs and would be wonderful for people.
I'm seeing what you're throwing down. Basically what you're saying is you want more Eddie Murphy.
I want more Eddie Murphy in the Haunted Mansion. I think my Beverly Hills Cop coaster, licensed from Paramount, is really going to be fun for people.
In addition to working on so many attractions, and we're just touching on a few of them, there's a couple I want to bounce back to too. You also are, when I say you're a prolific writer, I don't just mean in terms of writing stories, but you've written so many of, the Bible. Right? You've written the Haunted Mansion Bible, the Pirates of the Caribbean, Disney.
How old do you think I am?
Well,
the Gospel according to.
But you have, again, your author credits go very far and very deep. You also didn't you worked on the Art of Marvel's The Avengers?
Yeah, The Avengers.
Too? Yep. Screenplay by Disney, and to bring magic to your movie making. You also worked on, and I think these are, people always talk about, like, well, there is no great big book of Imagineering. I'm like, well, there is. There's the Imagineering Way, the Imagineering Workout. Some of those books, I think, have such incredibly valuable lessons, whether you're a business owner, a creator, or just individually, that you could take away. How does the writing process, how is that different? And from writing for a physical space where guests move through it at their own pace to writing something that they're going to hold in their hands?
Well, what's interesting about that, it reminds me of when the books first came about. And, I asked our VP here in Florida, so how do we go about pitching a book? And he goes, I don't know, ask Marty. So I called Marty and said, hey, I have an idea for a book on the Haunted Mansion. We have the film coming out. So there's obviously going to be a marketing push for the movie. Wouldn't this be a great opportunity to write a book that is ostensibly supposed to be a film tie-in, but what we're really using it as is a Trojan horse to get a book about the ride out there? And he goes, I love this idea. Write a book proposal. And I'm like, great. How do I do that? I hung up the phone. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. So to your point, what I wound up doing was I wrote what for an attraction or an Imagineering project would be a treatment, and I just did that, but for a book, and broke it up into chapters. And I just thought, okay, well, I'll do present tense prose, like I would for a treatment or this or that. And that was really all it was. To the point where after the fact, I was like, that's it? Because you think it's more magical or mysterious than it actually is. And I think part of that is this sort of, well, if I'm doing it, how hard could it be? It's that sort of self-deprecating.
Why is everybody just doing it?
Yeah, but it really was that. And then the same thing happened when he said, okay, write me a proposal letter for the book for our publishers in New York. I said, great. Hung up the phone. How do I do that? Same thing. I just put into written form what would normally be a verbal pitch, in our world. So I did a written pitch, kind of extolling the virtues of the project and why we should do it, and that worked. But ultimately, you're communicating. And ultimately, that is the same, regardless of the medium, regardless of the format, the structure. Most of those things can be learned if you're able to formulate conceptual thoughts and convey them in a way that people can understand. And that was something I learned another weird chance encounter in 1991. I was in one of our break rooms at Epcot, and somebody came in and said, John Hench is standing outside. So again, 21-year-old kid. So I go outside, and I'm in my uniform, which was very sweaty, and and I literally had a Premiere magazine with me and a ballpoint pen. I wanted to get his autograph. So I go up to him and I go, "Oh, Mr. Hench, my name's Jason. I'm a performer here, but I'm a writer. I want to be an Imagineering." He turns to me and he goes, "Well, I'll tell you one thing." And it's like just dove right in medias res. And I go, "Huh?" And he goes, and he started poking me in the chest. He goes, "If the audience doesn't get something that you tried to put forth, it's not their fault." He's like poking me in the chest hard too. He goes, "You didn't communicate." And I went, "Oh, okay, got it." But again, kind of like that example with Mike West, that one little tirade, completely unmotivated and out of the blue, was one of the most valuable lessons I ever had, especially as a writer, because it's true. And you see it now a lot with people trolling, the internet, like when people don't like their favorite movies. Well, you just didn't get it. What John Hench taught me was, if you're trying to communicate something, a story, to whatever degree of complexity you've decided to do it, it is incumbent upon you to clearly communicate. And if the audience doesn't take away from the experience what you wanted to, that's on you, not them. That's what he was saying. It was just a really weird forum. And then after that, I said, "Okay, can you sign this?"
But it's that, lifelong takeaway lesson that influences all the things that you do after that, because it's sort of resonating in your mind as you're writing whatever the thing is that you're working on next.
Same thing happened with Tony Baxter. Same year, 20th anniversary press event. I see him. I've got my little Dave Smith provided credential, and I see Tony standing in the hub at the Magic Kingdom. So I walk up to him, and I had a 20th anniversary press event program that I was having everyone sign, and to this day it's probably worth a fortune because everyone and their aunt signed it. But I go, "Oh, Mr. Baxter," I go, "My name's Jason. I work in entertainment here, but I want to be a writer. I want to work for Imagineering." He turns and he looks at me and goes, "Doesn't it bother you that there's a giant stage in front of this 16th century medieval castle?" Again, no hello, just right in. At least he didn't poke me. But I look at it and I go, yeah, I guess I guess it does. If it bothers you, it bothers me. But then he went on.
Right, is he testing me? Is he challenging me?
What he had said was, he goes, "This was designed to tell a story and to make people believe that they were back in 16th century France, And he goes, but now there's a giant stage in front of it with like a cartoon mouse dancing around and trumpet players and stuff." So what he was saying was, the stage, which was added later, took away from the original intent of what that was meant to be. And what that taught me was detail is important. Anachronisms are important. That would come to be called the copper penny principle from the movie Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve, where he's back in time in this mental construct of his own, and seeing a copper penny, which was out of period, is what ultimately broke the illusion. So Tony's point was, that stage, the show's great, people love the characters, it's not that, but it's a copper penny, and it's taking you out of the illusion that was crafted for that particular frame.
Well, it also, I think, talks to the evolution of the guest experience, the guest expectations, what we want, what we need, what we're looking for. And look, it makes me think of, you're just talking about a stage, but we talked about technology and how it's rapidly evolving in themed entertainment, having to sort of balance this cutting edge tech while making sure that storytelling remains the core. I think what we're also looking for too is, we use words like immersive, personalized experiences. What do you see as the next step, the next trend in the evolution of theme park storytelling?
Well, it's interesting because for a long time, I felt like more immersion and interaction might have been it. Now I think we're starting to see that people don't necessarily always want that, or they only want it to a certain extent. Because
Gunslingers is exhausting, Jason. I don't want to do all that. That's a lot of exercise for me.
It is. I know you definitely got to stretch before that. But then, because I had long been intrigued by the notion of essentially creating a live action video game where you can go through an environment and have an interactive experience that's 100% organic and not screen based, like living the movie in every sense of the word. And I think you saw that a little bit with Galactic Star Cruiser, which we saw that the public didn't necessarily have an appetite for that level of immersion. Again, I think it was a grand experiment, and I definitely think that there are still frontiers in that space to be pursued.
They did for a short period of time in Hong Kong Disneyland. They had that Marvel experience that you ran through and walked through, and it was not screen based. You were very much living that. Yeah,
and it's funny because for a time, I think this goes back to like 2005, I had been pitching what I envisioned to be a new line of business called Disney's Immersive Adventures, where you would go beyond the berm. So these would be attractions in other parts of the world. The example that I ultimately wrote up for them was a haunted mansion, but one that is built in the actual Hudson River Valley, 45 minutes outside of Manhattan. And it's a real manor house where you could stay for days or a week at a time and essentially experience your own haunted mansion adventure with the location, with the characters. So if you wanted to, you could walk down the hall at 2 a.m. in your slippers and bathrobe and interact with a portrait, or go to Seance Circle and commune with Madame Leota. And I had a number of different versions of that. Star Wars was one of them. Indiana Jones was one of them. Imagine a Costco size building with a temple in front of it. And once you go in there, that Costco-style warehouse building is home to any number of different Indiana Jones adventures that you could live. Imagine going to Indiana Jones Adventure at Disneyland, but walking through it and interacting and literally trying to solve puzzles or escape booby traps or whatever it is. So for a long time, I really felt strongly that would be the way to go. Galactic Star Cruiser is the closest that anyone has come to that sort of thing. But again, I think it's going to come down to what is the appetite of the average person? How many deep divers are out there who would be willing to have that sort of truly immersive, in-depth experience, and how much are you willing to pay for it? Right. Because obviously our business in general is very capital intensive, and it's expensive, and that's ultimately going to be reflected in the price for a ticket or whatever it happens to be. And I think that's something we have to get our arms around, because I know people complain about pricing and theme park prices, Disney, Universal, whoever. But I still go back to Michael Eisner's analogy, I think from the 90s, where he compared what a day at a Disney park costs relative to a ticket to a baseball game, a Broadway show, a concert. And when you think of it in those terms, for what a day ticket costs, and you're getting 8 to 10 hours of entertainment that just run the gamut, from parades with dozens and dozens of performers to these elaborate attractions with all sorts of sophisticated audio-animatronics, it's expensive. But when you start, when I hear what people paid to go to the Super Bowl or a Taylor Swift concert, I'm like, and again, nothing against those things, but like,
if it's right for you, the money,
right. And that was, I think that was true of Galactic Star Cruiser, was the people that did spend the money and were into it had a literally life-changing experience.
So, I'm raising my hand. Yeah,
there you
absolutely.
go. You can't see, folks, but he's raising his hand. I like to help. Your radio is going to take off one of these days, Lou.
Look, as you were describing the Indiana Jones, did you see the smile on my face? I'm like, yes. Jason, like this, just keep talking. Like this is, but it is that sort of analogy of there are different guests. You talk about sort of the deep dive. There is that guest that sort of treads along the top of the water, and one that goes a little bit farther down. And there are some of those, us, that want those, immerse me in this world. I want to completely buy into it. We did the Galactic Star Cruiser. It was a privilege to be able to do it. And after I was done, I was like, I understand the sticker shock. but we reverse engineered the numbers. Like, what would it cost me to have this experience, to have this, and it made sense, right? It didn't make sense. It doesn't make sense for everybody, and I get that, but it doesn't mean that those things cannot still exist. I think the premise absolutely makes sense. I think there's a lot of us that want that truly immersive overnight type of thing. I remember stories about Twilight Zone Tower of Terror at one point was going to be like a hotel. I'm like, yeah, man, like make something like that. To use the universalism, if they build a Hogwarts that you can stay in, I mean, it's just a license to print money. I think we're getting there. It's just sort of figuring out some of the little. I think there's lessons to be learned from the Star Cruiser that all the creative theme park folks are going to take away.
And what I love most about the Galactic Star Cruiser story, just in terms of everything that happened, is just the fact that Imagineering has taken that swing. That's what they should be doing. And occasionally you're going to have things that are going to miss. And in this case, I think it was more of an economic situation. It certainly wasn't a testament to the quality of the product or the experience. And I just hope and pray that there are more things like that, where it's like, we think this is wonderful. We think this is what people want. We think we have an opportunity to give someone a life-changing experience. And yes, it's going to cost this much money.
And understand, too, and this has been a conversation that's been happening relatively recently, not everything is meant for everybody. What I mean specifically is when you talk about closing Tom Sawyer Island to bring in Cars Land, I get it, right? You can make all the arguments for why Tom Sawyer Island was not a revenue generator, was closed more than 50% of the time. A lot of people don't know who Tom Sawyer Island, and they are not building this Cars attraction for me and you. They're building it for our kids and their kids who grew up with this and can say, these are the things that I grew up with the same way that we did with our parents, and then we started to do with our kids too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's obviously a hot topic at the moment, the Rivers of America at Magic Kingdom. And my feeling about it is, knowing Imagineering, what we're going to get is going to be spectacular. The deeper issue is what the average guest wants out of a theme park experience relative to what theme parks have been and what they're going to be in the future. What I mean by that is, my argument for Rivers of America is, and I know Tom Sawyer's Island's not a revenue generator, it's not really, for the amount of real estate you're talking about, it's probably not soaking up as many bodies as you would like either. The problem is what the Rivers of America and Tom Sawyer's Island do to contribute to that whole side of the park. They really make Frontierland and Liberty Square what they are, and without it there, you're going to notice. I'm hoping that it's whatever they do is so artfully done that it's like, great, we love it. Sorry that had to go away, but we love this. But that's another example of, you asked earlier, what's untouchable. Once upon a time, I might have said, well, Rivers of America is untouchable. At Disneyland, I suspect it is. But down here, it's like the Magic Kingdom is the most successful, popular theme park in the world. So obviously, questions of what certain plots of land can do for the park in terms of absorbing people or generating revenue. Obviously, that's a different situation. But I think as long as it provides people with the next level experience of what they want from a day at a theme park, I think it'll be great. But it's going to be a big change for that area of the park, and will probably trigger things that they didn't even anticipate, whether it's view sheds or whatever it happens to be. It's the Rivers just plays a huge role in the storytelling on that whole side of the park. But again, time moves on, and just kind of have to adapt to it. Again, what would Walt have done?
Yeah, we can only speculate, but Walt be like, hey, people seem to like this Cars movie.
Or I think
it's going to be a guest satisfier. Again, for our kids and our kids' kids, the metaphorical family from Ohio that visits once every 5 years, that is going to be the thing to say, hey, we need to go back to Disney because our kids grew up on watching Cars.
And it's funny because I truly believe that in a lot of these situations, and again, there's no way to know for sure, but I truly believe in my heart Walt would have been the first person in many instances to be like, take it out. Yeah, and he probably would have been incredibly unsentimental about it because he seemed very pragmatic in that regard, where something's not working, change it. You know, he, like George Lucas, he wants to change movies after they're done. You know, so I think
that's why I have 17 versions of episode 4. Right?
Exactly. And please, no more. It's going to get to the point where it's like, what's next? It's like, well, Harrison's going to come perform it live in the living room. That's about as high def as it's going to get.
Jason, I have hundreds of questions just ping-ponging in my mind that I would love to get to. I would love to have you come back and do this some more. We need to talk about things like the Monsters, Inc. Laugh Floor. I want to spend some time talking about Raiders of the Lost Jedi, Temple of Doom, Star Wars Weekends, Great Movie Ride, so many other things that you worked on, if you can. I'll give you one final rapid fire, just off the top question. What is one piece of Disney memorabilia or theme park memorabilia that you wish, maybe you have it already in your house, just nobody knows, but what is the one thing you wish you owned?
That's a really, really good question. I think it would have, for me, it would obviously have to come from probably one of the big two. And then you're also trying
That's
to
a Disney helicopter overhead, just listening to make sure you don't.
There is a sniper up there, waiting to just double tap. For some reason, either a tombstone or the Haunted Mansion spell book comes to mind from the seance scene, because I wrote the copy for the book that's open, but it's also very, very artfully done, and it just seems like a great thing to have, you know, in your house that feels like it should be there. And the reason I say that is because, like, and I'm not name dropping, but one night we went to John Stamos' house, and
you know what?
as one does.
You know, it was enough with the Marty Sklar,
right.
The Tony Baxter, the John Hench poking through. Now
I'm going to go for the TGIF crowd. And Patrick Duffy was not available. So we happened to be with them at the park one day in California, and he's like, oh, you want to come out to the house tonight for dinner? And he has a Dumbo that he bought, a Dumbo vehicle in the middle of the room, and it's amazing. But that got me to thinking, like, oh, well, what would I want? You know, and I think I would love things that you could integrate really organically into the house that would look like they belong there. Because say what you will about a Dumbo vehicle, it's, you know, it's different when it's in a living room.
Right, you're not going to be sitting there watching the big game, sitting in the
Dumbo, in the Dumbo.
I love the book because it's slightly obscure. It's not the obvious answer, but it's the thing that is so important and inherent to attraction.
And then the other thing that just popped into my head, I would love, and this crosses, it was in Pirates, the ride, but it's really more of a film prop. I would love the portrait of Peter Ustinov as Blackbeard.
Wow. Nice.
I would love to have that hang on the wall.
Nice. People are Googling Peter
and my wife is drawing up divorce papers, but other than that's it.
See, just assuming that there's nobody complaining about the things that you're bringing.
We're crossing the line with Ustinov.
Because then Stamos bought the D from the Disneyland sign, didn't he?
Yep.
Is that just sitting in his bathroom?
I believe he has a lot of disposable income, Stamos. He doesn't discuss it with me. But
yeah, Jason, this has been great, man. I would love to do this again. Hopefully it doesn't take us 20 years in between.
Well, you can come to the cemetery, perhaps. Bring a Ouija board.
We were comparing our AARP cards earlier.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, man, I thank you for all that you have done, all that you have contributed. I hope you have been able to sit in your, whatever your version of the Dumbo chair is in your house, and realize just how your work, your creativity, your very obvious passion for what you do has not just impacted, but positively impacted not just countless guests, but literally generations of families. Like, I think that's, I think when we get up to our age, we start thinking about words like legacy. And the legacy that you left behind is this indelible mark on the memories of so many people.
Thank you. That means a lot to hear. And you do think about it from time to time. I think about it more like when I consider what I've devoted my life to. And I don't mean to reduce it like this, but for me, it's kind of like, you know what? We did something positive. Like, I've spent 30 plus years doing this now, and the through line that runs through it all is it was all meant to be fun and good and positive for people. So that in and of itself feels good, knowing that whether you're good at your job or not, at least you're doing something for the benefit of people. And again, the way we started with, it's been kind of a weird tumultuous 6 years. We've never needed that more than now. Comfort, reassurance, and escape. Giving people a place to go, whether it's in the palm of their hand in a book or a place like this where it's literally surrounding them. But that's what they want. Life is hard enough as it is, so it's nice to be involved with something that is meant on some level to provide a respite from that.
This is exactly why we're friends. I mean, we only see each other every 20 years, but that's what I want.
It's a 20-year friendship.
But I want this show to be this positive distraction outlet and hopefully leaving a bit of a positive legacy behind. Anything else you want to share? Where people can find you? Home address, whatever it might be.
Social security number. I'm going to have some blood and urine drawn for you. Well, I'm currently in between roles, as we've discussed. And so I'm doing a little bit of freelance work. I'm actually considering academia. I would love to return to Walt Disney Imagineering one day. I don't quite know what the next move is going to be, but the one thing I'm positive of is that it will be more of the same in terms of I want to put stuff out there for people that makes them feel good and enriches their lives in some way.
I love it. You are not just a gifted storyteller. You're just a good man, and I dig that about you. So
thank you, sir.
Jason Surrell, thank you so much for being here. Hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yep, anytime. Thanks for having me.
It's time for our Walt Disney World Trivia Question of the Week, where you can put your Disney knowledge to the test, whether it is Disney history, hidden details, or a classic quote or sound from the parks. This is your chance to not only show off what you know, but if you answer correctly, you'll be entered to win a Disney prize package. And this week's trivia contest is once again brought to you by you. Because by joining the WDW Radio Nation, you're not only helping to support the podcast, live shows, and events, but you are part of making the magic. Because for as little as $1 per month, you can enjoy perks like scavenger hunts, monthly group video calls, exclusive surprises, care packages from the parks, and much more. Plus, your support helps our Dream Team project, which helps raise money for the Make-A-Wish Foundation of America. You can learn more and join at www.radio.com/support. And I will quickly thank some new and longtime members of the Nation family, including Heather Godin, Brian Pearson, Stephanie Pruitt, and Trinity Morales. I sincerely appreciate your love, support, friendship, and help. And now, before we get to this week's question, let's go back, review last week's, and select our winner. So last week I shared audio from our panel discussion at MegaCon Orlando about Marvel in the Disney parks. So I thought we would stay with Marvel, specifically the new Captain America movie, which just came out, which we can talk about in the spoiler support group over on Facebook and or on this week's WDW Radio Live. But I digress, because in this film, the actress who reprises her role as Betty Ross in Captain America Brave New World has a very famous father who could also be seen in a Walt Disney World attraction, although for not too much longer. The question was to tell me, who is the father of the actress that plays Betty Ross in Captain America Brave New World? Thanks to so many of you who entered, got this one correct, and know that the answer is Liv Tyler, who plays Betty Ross in Captain America, who also played Betty Ross in the original Incredible Hulk as part of the MCU, and she is the daughter of Steven Tyler from Aerosmith and Rock and Roller Coaster. And so once again, I took all the correct entries, randomly selected one, and last week you were playing for a WDW Radio keychain, some stickers, a pin, and a mystery prize. And last week's winner, randomly selected, is D. Schmidt. So D, congratulations. I will get your prize package out to you right away. And if you played last week and didn't win, that's okay, because here's your next chance to enter in this week's Walt Disney World Trivia Challenge. So let's go from the movies to the parks, and specifically an attraction that not only do I love, but it is classic, and one that Jason Surrell, my guest this week, worked on. And your question this week is simple. Tell me, what is the name of the ghostly bride in the attic of the Haunted Mansion, and how many husbands has she had? What is the name of the bride in the attic? And how many husbands has she had? You have until Sunday, March 2nd at 11:59 p.m. Eastern to go to WDWRadio.com, click on this week's podcast, and you'll once again play for a prize package that includes, but is not limited to, the WDW Radio keychain, stickers, pin, and a mystery prize. So good luck and have fun. That's going to do it for this week's show. Thank you once again for taking the time to tune in this and every week. I am so incredibly grateful for you, your time, your friendship, and your support. Always remember, you are not a fan, but you are a friend. Thanks again to Jason Surrell for joining me. And if you enjoyed this episode, please let me know. Come comment and be part of the community and conversation over in the WDW Radio Clubhouse on Facebook. It's our fun, friendly, family-friendly, and very welcoming community. And I'd love to hear from you. What Disney attraction do you think has the best storytelling and why? You can also call the voicemail at 407-900-9391. That's 407-900-WDW1. Let me hear your answer, and I will play it on the air. There's a lot of fun stuff coming up that I'd love for you to be part of, including the 18th annual Walk for Wishes, Thursday, March 27th at 5 p.m. in Lake Eola, Florida. It's an event put on by Make-A-Wish that we are going to form a WDW Radio walking team. It's very simple, no training required. It's just about 1 mile. It's a great way to have fun, make a difference, and help raise money for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. You can learn more by going to www.com/walkforwishes25. You can register there, join us at the walk at Lake Eola, or participate virtually. You can also get your official WDW Radio walking team shirt. Speaking of events, thanks to everyone who came out to our Meet of the Month this past weekend and everybody who participated in the Run Disney Princess Half Marathon weekend. To learn more about upcoming events, meetups, group cruises, and adventures by Disney, go to www.radio.com/events. A couple other quick reminders. Don't forget that my guided audio walking tours of the Magic Kingdom are now available as a free podcast. They are immersive, in-depth, guided walking tours as if you and I were walking through Magic Kingdom, whether you are planning, reminiscing, or looking to experience the magic at home. They're all recorded in binaural audio to give you the sense of being there, and it's a great way to discover some of the secrets, history, and fun facts. And you can find this wherever you get your podcast, so please subscribe, and more importantly, share the show and tell a friend. And speaking of telling a friend, for 17 years, I have been telling you about how much I trust MouseFan Travel to help Disney fans like you plan stress-free, unforgettable vacations because their expert personal service ensures that they handle every detail so you can focus on making the memories. Best of all, their planning services are completely free. So whether you're headed to Walt Disney World, Disneyland, Cruise Line, Adventures by Disney, or anywhere else, they've got you covered with customized concierge-level service at no cost to you. Get your free, no-obligation quote and learn more by visiting mousefantravel.com. Also, don't forget to visit LouMangello.com. You can learn more about my Momentum Weekend Workshop this October 16th through the 20th in Walt Disney World. It is a 4-day, one-room, 50-person event with hands-on strategies to start, grow, and monetize your business. Take advantage of the super-duper early bird pricing going on now to get the lowest ticket price possible. And while you're there, if you're looking to bring a little bit of Disney magic to your business, brand, or event, I share Disney-inspired lessons on everything from customer service, innovation, leadership, and storytelling to help businesses, schools, and teams create unforgettable experiences and real success. So whether you're looking to enhance customer loyalty, spark creativity, or lead like Walt, I'd love to help. Again, you can learn more and book me to speak over at LouMangello.com. I hope to see you on the live show this Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Facebook or YouTube. In the meantime, please remember to be kind, choose the good, have a great day, and even better tomorrow. And always remember, the flower that blooms in adversity is most rare and beautiful of all. You know where that's from? Love you. See ya. Bye.
Don't tell him, Carlos. Don't be chicken.
I am not chicken. I will not talk.